Okay, welcome everyone to this session as part of Climate Services Week. So my name is Joe Darren. I'm a Science Manager in International Climate Services at the Met Office and also have a joint position with the University of Bristol. And I'm joined here in the room at the Met Office by Fai Fung and Stacey New. And I'll let Fai introduce himself shortly. But yeah, just to say thank you to Stacey for organising the whole of Climate Services Week and featuring this session on the Met Office Academic Partnership and looking at research frontiers in climate services. So I'll just pass over to Fai, who's been supporting on organising this session, to introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm Fai Fung and also a Science Manager, like Joe, for the UK Climate Projection Science into Services team. I also have a joint position at the University of Bristol, where in civil engineering, and I think represented working mainly with Francesca, actually, quite a lot, who's be speaking today as well. So back to you, Joe.
Thanks very much. So as part of this session, we really wanted to showcase some of the work that the Met Office is doing in collaboration with academic partners related to climate services, but also think about where next for research, particularly underpinning the development of climate services, but also the collaborations and the different ways that we can work together. So I'll just move on to the next slide and show the speakers who are and panelists as part of today's session. So we've got representation from all of the current MOAP academic partners. Dr. Marta Bruno Suarez from the University of Leeds, who is also a Met Office University academic fellow with a joint position. Professor Ross Cornforth from the Walker Institute at University of Reading, who won't be presenting in the first part, will be joining for the panel session in the second part of today. Professor Mike Davis, Professor of Building Physics and Environment from University College London. And then we have Dr. Rachel James and Dr. Francesca Pianosi from the University of Bristol. And then Professor Richard Betts from University of Exeter, where he's a chair in climate impacts, but also with a position as head of climate impacts at Met Office Hadley Centre. And then finally, Professor Tim Willings, Professor of Physical Climate Science at the University of Oxford, who again won't be presenting in the first part, but will be contributing to the panel session and Q&A. So just before we move on to the first part, a bit of meeting etiquette. So we're all well used to online meetings by now, but just please do keep your microphones and cameras off during the presentations, and we'll be able to contribute during the Q&A session later. The event is being recorded and will be made available along with all of the Climate Service Week events that are happening here at the Met Office, some of which are internal and some of which are external as well. And then if you have any questions through the talks and the panel session, what we're actually going to do, rather than put questions in the chat, which sometimes can be a bit distracting, we're going to use a Google Doc. So hopefully you can access this, and Fai will post the link to this Google Doc in the chat. There we go. Fantastic. Thanks, Fai. So do let us know if you can't access that for any reason, but here we'll keep a track of the questions and also have a bit of a discussion as well relating to the presentations and this topic around research frontiers. So finally, also, you know, we each come from different institutions and then different sort of backgrounds and perspectives on climate services. So of course, the principle of respect is something that we hopefully can maintain in this session. So respecting the views, beliefs and views of everyone, which we're maintaining throughout the Climate Services Week. So with that, I wanted to start with a Menti poll just to get people thinking ahead of the planned session today. So Fai, he's well ahead of me, has put a link to the Menti poll in the chat. So hopefully if you go to that, you should see a question, which I'll start presenting now. But what are the main challenges to developing effective climate services? And you can put in some keywords here and we'll build up a word cloud. So I'm just going to stop sharing the PowerPoint for a second. and then have a think and contribute to that. And I'll share the screen as the answers come in. There we go, it's working. That's always the nervous moment of, is this working? Great, okay, we can already see some words coming in around communication, evaluation. Yeah, so wow, rich information already. So yeah, so those issues around communication uncertainty are coming up, and trust as well. I guess that's trust in the information, but also trust between partners, providers, and users of climate services. And then engagement and evaluation are also showing up. Monitoring, actionable information, resources, urgency. Yeah, these are fantastic contributions. So we'll just give that another second to capture all of the thinking here. Okay, fantastic. Thanks everyone for contributing. So clearly there are a number of challenges in developing climate services, some of which are quite practical around maybe data availability, or maybe just looking at some of the other ones here, around maybe common language. And then there's some that could also be advanced through research to try and improve methods and improve approaches. And so that's really the focus of today, is to try and share what we're doing in different contexts from the MOAP partners, and what collaborations we can take forward to try and advance the field of climate services. So fantastic, thank you for contributing to that. So just to set the context, I'm going to pass over to Verity Payne shortly, who works in the Science Partnerships team here at the Met Office and has been managing the MOAP partnership. So Verity, yeah, over to you.
Great, thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. I'm Verity Payne, UK Science Partnerships Manager here at the Met Office. And I think that one of the big things that Stephen was going to say in that video, which hopefully you'll see later, is that the Met Office Academic Partnership, or MOAP as we call it, is a key strategic partnership for the Met Office, and is critical for helping the Met Office deliver the research and innovation that underpins all of our services, including the climate services. So we've currently got 6 UK university partners, the universities of Bristol, Exeter, Leeds, Oxford, Reading, and UCL. And I imagine some of you are familiar with the way this works, but essentially each university has a joint chair, and they lead and coordinate the partnership within their university. And they also bring technical expertise relevant to our research and innovation themes. The joint chairs, along with the Met Office co-chair, chair a research advisory panel, or RAP, as we call it, and that oversees the collaborative research between the organisations. And then we also hold super research advisory panels, or super RAPs, and those bring together all of the MOAP universities and sometimes other relevant experts to focus on a specific topic. And the outcomes of the super RAPs are things like submissions of NERC highlight topics or perspective papers to high-profile journals. And I can think of 2 really interesting super RAPs currently underway that probably have a particular relevance to climate services. So Dan Mitchell from the University of Bristol is leading one around temperature and health currently. And we have another one looking at food security, which is led by Pete Falloon at the Met Office. So Stephen probably mentions in the video that the MOAP universities often contribute more to the sort of blue skies end of our research and innovation. And when I think about the sort of examples that we tend to give of where MOAP has really helped us, it tends to be more around the aspects of model development and that sort of thing. But I'm aware that all of our MOAP partners are involved in climate services, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from today's speakers and from the panel discussion. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Verity. And we didn't need the video in the end anyway. You captured things brilliantly there. So yeah, thanks for the suggestions in the chat to share the video link. So I've done that now. So hopefully you can look at that. So we're going to move on to the next part of the session now, which is the contributions from colleagues at the MOAP partner universities. I'm going to start with Dr. Marta Bruno Suarez at the University of Leeds. And I'll pass over to Fi to chair this next part of the session for the talk. So Fi, over to you.
Great, thanks, Joe. Speaking the next, I think we've got about just under an hour, so let's see how we go. But we'll try to keep the questions to the Google Doc, and if we do have a bit more time, then maybe we can take those questions to the panel session where all speakers will actually be taking part. Just Marta and the speakers, I'll give you a warning at about 9 minutes. So, you know, to give you the kind of 1 minute warning. So over to you, Marta.
Thank you, Faye. I hope you can see my slides. Can I just, yeah? Okay,
No,
great. Thank you. Thanks. And hi, everyone. So my name is Marta. As Joe and Faye already mentioned, I am a Met Office University Academic Fellow, which means I work in both institutions. I am here as a representative of a huge group of people within the University of Leeds that work with the Met Office and collaborate in this MOAP. And I have a few of my colleagues actually online, I've just noticed. So Suraj Desai, Andrew Taylor, Nia Mittal, and Yimling Siu. So, and we're all, and there's more of us as well. So my presentation today is just, and I apologize in advance if I'm going to rush through some of the things, but we have so many projects going on, and we just wanted to capture some of our projects and where we're working with the Met Office at the moment. But obviously, I will only be able to touch so much about each of the projects. So, you know, if you want to know more, contact us, contact me, and I'll put you in contact with the right people, or just follow up the links to the various projects websites that I've presented in my slides. So if I can just move on forward. Oh, okay. So these are some of the projects I'll be just very quickly, you know, cover today. You can see we work across different regions in the world at the moment with the Met Office, and I'll just skip through this because I'll be talking about these. Let me just, for some reason, my computer. Here it is. Okay, so one of the projects, again, this is MedGold. It focuses on Europe, and this is finishing actually. This project is finishing this month. It focuses on trying to develop new tools for decision-making support, looking specifically at 3 Mediterranean crops: grapes, olives, and durum wheat. And we have specific case studies in Portugal, Italy, and Spain. And I suppose one of the key things we've pursued here has been a very strong line across the whole development of the project was this idea of co-production. So we've worked with industrial partners to develop the pilot services that we then use to explore and try and understand how those services could be applicable to other communities, other institutions across Europe. So there's a lot of work being done, a lot of papers we already have out. I've just listed some of the papers that we have produced there. And again, it covers from the more technical aspects, the model aspects, but also in terms of understanding how climate information can better inform decision-making and activities from the different users. So if you want to know more about this, if you're particularly interested in agriculture in Europe, and how to develop these kind of services to fit the agricultural sector, please have a look at the website. I've included there. And there's also many more publications, papers, and reports from there. So if you're particularly interested in this area, I suggest you go to the website or talk to me. I'm involved in this one. The next one is ARC. So this is the Asia Regional Resilience to a Changing Climate, and Joe is also part of this one. And here, the focus is on South Asia. And this was a FCDO funding. It ends now, the first part of this program. It's now being, a second part of ARC is being, ARC 2, as we call it, is being developed as we speak. So some of this work will continue in the next stage of the program. And here we particularly focus on 4 countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And the focus here was looking across the different timescales. So from the weather forecasts down to the long-term climate change projections. And the idea here, there was a lot of emphasis on coordination, on capacity building, on developing support of new services, improving existing ones as well. And we work with a huge range of different stakeholders. We also look, and this was the part I was more involved in terms of understanding what were the benefits, socioeconomic benefits of the services that we were working on in the region. And again, we have a couple of papers coming out. One is already out, the other one is coming up. And there's also more information on the website about exactly the technical work that particularly the Met Office has been doing in this project. We then jump into Confer, co-production of climate services for East Africa. So this focuses on the Great Horn of Africa. This is an Horizon 2020 project, again, in collaboration with the Met Office as well. And here the focus is pretty much, as it says in the name, to co-produce climate service in East Africa, either improving existing products provided by ICPAC, which is the regional center in this region, or developing new services. So we're tackling both aspects here. So there's a lot of emphasis on collaborating, co-producing the research with key stakeholders in the region. There's a huge emphasis as well in developing new climate prediction or improving existing ones, and also in building and training capacity activities. And again, there is a few papers coming out. This project is midway at the moment, so there's still a lot of work to be done. I just want to highlight here some work actually done by my colleague Nia, who's online, on this kind of systematic literature review that we've been doing of trying to understand climate service development in the region over the last 10 years and trying to understand what has been developed for what, for whom, and how. So that's also a paper that we're working on, and we expect to have that out soon, hopefully. We then jump into the UK Climate Resilience Programme, and this is where my colleague Suraj, who's online, I think as well, and Dr. Kate Lonsdale, based at Leeds, together with Jason Lowe from the Met Office. They are the champions for this program, which is funded by UKRI, and it basically funds a number of different research projects to advance different areas, going from climate services to climate risks and adaptation. So again, there were too many projects to include in a slide, but if you want to know more about this, please go to the website, contact the team, and they're happy to engage with you and tell you more about the projects. Actually, the website is very good. So if you want to know more about each of the projects, you have quite a bit of information there. Oh, sorry, just trying to find my arrows. Now, these 2 projects I'm going to talk next, these are past projects. They're just finished. So the first one is the GCRF African Swift. This was had a strong focus on nowcasting, at least the work we were doing in Leeds, but it kind of involves different timescales as well. So this was also a part of a wider program of partnerships between forecasting centers and universities. So as you can see there's different kinds of partners involved. I would like to emphasize this FASTA app, which was an application, developed focusing on forecasting African storms, and it's available online. There is the website there for this FASTA application. And there's now considering how to expand this to other areas, and apparently is available in Google Play Store. So if you can go and have a look at it. And I think the idea is to try and expand this to other areas and try and understand the impact of having these kind of tools available to people. The last project, which I think also ended as well, part of the CI40 with iCrystal and Mfula, and this was part again from another big program in Africa, the FCFA. And again, this was NIA was very much involved in this, together with John Marsham and other colleagues at Leeds and people at the Met Office, of course. And again, this was trying to understand, obviously focusing particularly in tea as a key crop in some of those countries in Africa, and trying to understand some of the climate factors that were influencing the development of the production, again, underpinned by a lot of co-production processes, stakeholder engagement, and
yeah. About 1 minute left.
Yeah, so I'm just, this is one upcoming project. So we've just been funded this. It's an Horizon 2020 project led by the Met Office together with the University of Leeds and University of Oxford, so two of the MOAP universities. And the focus is on seamless climate information. So they're trying to push the boundaries of prediction and trying to do more kind of seamless approach to things. So watch this space. And my last slide is just some remarks and outlook. So in terms of MOAP at Leeds, we have a huge team of different academics with different expertise, ranging from the social sciences down to the health, engineering, climate sciences, hydrology, etc. So we are able to address a number of different research projects, different areas of research that link directly with climate services. And we particularly, well, part of us particularly look at the links with society. So trying to understand where climate services fit and how we can really tailor and develop them to better benefit society at large in terms of decision making and supporting action on the ground. And this links a bit with the ongoing climate change emergency, the need to develop and provide information that can cater for different needs, different kinds of activities and decision making across different timescales. So this idea of seamless, it's very, very important, not only, you know, in terms of the research we want to do, but also in terms of the users and the people who need this kind of information. These need to be obviously co-produced. You know, the idea of nowadays developing projects where we don't talk to the end users is, you know, out of the question, particularly in the context of climate services. And this is where we see also a key role for the social sciences. The need to support these kind of processes effectively, not only in terms of methods, but also in terms of exploring different areas that are equally important for the effective implementation and use of climate services, such as considerations for equity, gender, governance systems, innovation, access, etc. So that's it from me. Sorry if I rushed, apologies. I did warn I was going to rush through all these different projects, but please get in contact with us, either me directly or my colleagues, or through the websites, the links that I put on the slides. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Marta. That was quite a tour, I think, of many projects. And well done for keeping in under about 10 minutes. So and thanks for summing up some of the key challenges, or at least the key aspects of some of the research that you're doing with the MOAP partnership Leeds. So if you have any further questions for Marta, please do put them into the Google Doc. And I'm going to move swiftly on to Mike Davies, Professor Mike Davies from UCL. So Mike, do you have your slides at the ready? And just for the others, so that you know the order, because I don't think we said, I think following Mike, we'll have University of Bristol, so Rachel James and Francesca Pianozzi, followed by Richard Betts from the Met Office and the University of Exeter. So Mike, to you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to attempt to give a very quick overview of relevant work in our institute, the Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering, which sits within the Faculty of the Built Environment at UCL. But of course, there's lots more relevant work going on throughout UCL, but I'm just focusing on some of the work specifically within our institute. And as I said, we sit within the Faculty of the Built Environment, and I suppose the relevant work cuts across various themes of climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, the built environment, obviously, but connections to health, very importantly, and including urban climates. So I'm going to begin with a project that I lead on and just give a little bit of detail about that project in order to try and give you a flavour of the type of project that we undertake within the Institute. But then I'll give a few other examples of relevant work, but I won't have time to go into the detail for those projects, so I'll just be flashing up. I think one or two of my colleagues might be online as well. I think I saw Claire Heaviside, who's also in our Institute, who's joined. Good, so I'll hopefully move on. So Marta mentioned the UK Climate Resilience Programme. And the project I'll give a little bit of detail on is one called Climate Care, and as it says there, it's related to overheating in care homes. We know that care homes are currently overheating across the UK, and we also know, of course, that the people who reside in the care homes, the older people, are much more vulnerable to heat than the general population. So it's a pressing and urgent issue, which we're very grateful for the funding to be able to pursue. We had a pilot project which focused on some care homes in London, and then fortunately we received funding for the main project, which enabled us to extend the study from, I think it was 5 care homes in the pilot to, the ambition is to cover 50 care homes across the UK. As you can imagine, the pandemic has made the work particularly challenging in care homes, but we're making, I hope, good progress. And I think we're now monitoring in approaching 40 care homes, undertaking the relevant modelling work. You can see there that we're working with many institutions and organisations, including the regulator for care homes, the Care Quality Commission, who've been exceptionally helpful in helping us co-create the work and also enabling access to the homes. So it's a very interdisciplinary project, as I said, with this overarching goal of addressing this issue of adapting UK settings to climate change. Just a very quick run through some of the methods. We're undertaking monitoring, as I mentioned, within in the care settings. We're undertaking surveys with residents, but also people working in the care settings, and also a series of interviews. Just spend just a minute on this slide. It's I think particularly relevant to the meeting today. As part of the work, we're modelling the care settings that we're monitoring and building thermal models of them. It's a model that's called Energy Plus. It's a well-established model, and we're using the monitored data in part both to understand the actual conditions in these care homes, but to calibrate and validate the thermal modelling, which enables us to test the impact of different interventions that are there with the intention of reducing exposure to heat in these care settings. And we're using weather files, hourly weather files, to drive those thermal models from both the present day, but also looking at a 2-degree world and 4-degree world. And as I note there, at the moment, we've been using weather files based on UKCP 09, because the hourly weather files in the format that required weren't available. So we've been incredibly grateful for the collaboration with the Met Office and that in advising and enabling us to decide which are the most appropriate of these Subsidy weather files to use. But we're very shortly going to be using, we hope, the similar files which are based on UKCP 18. Subsidy is undertaking some work to produce those files as they did last time. So I'll give a bit more detail on the slide there. So we've been modelling these types of interventions on the care homes, a whole variety of different interventions, ranging from improvements to the ventilation regimes in the dwellings to external shading and so on. I won't go through them all in detail. A little bit of work I'm just going to spend 1 or 2 slides on now relates to the intervention of shading, putting shading, both vertical and horizontal shading devices on the windows of these care homes, in an attempt to reduce the amount of solar radiation inputted into the rooms, and therefore hopefully cool the regime, the spaces. And we're looking at the cost benefit of doing that by understanding the temperature reductions that arise, and therefore the reduction, the improvement in the reduction in months of life lost within those homes as a result, and then monetizing those months saved. So this was published fairly recently, and it established the methodology for this work, and we were able to look at the implications of different assumptions about different uses of life tables and other important aspects of the methodology. So we were pleased to get this initial work published, and it's just the first in a series of papers. So I'll just put in a initial set of results. I won't go into the details of the results. The important column is on the right here. So basically we used different assumptions about life tables regarding the vulnerability of these older people in care settings to try to understand how sensitive the results would be to that. We modelled the effect of these interventions. In this case, it was shading, and we looked at the number of heat deaths. This is for a care home, one care home of 50 residents, and these are the results for 1 year. And we looked at different years of different weather files, a hot year and an average year. We were therefore able to understand the difference in these averted life years due to these different interventions and different assumptions, and we were able to monetize the value of the lost life years averted by these interventions, and then making some assumptions about the cost of the interventions. And the assumptions about the period that they would need renewing by, I think we said 20 years in this case. We were able to build up a picture, an initial picture of how effective these interventions were and the cost benefit of doing so. So the summary was basically using over a 20-year time horizon. There were quite substantial benefits, monetized benefits of these interventions, and acknowledging the uncertainty, even from this initial work, it appeared that the modest cost adaptations to heat risk might be justified in these conventional cost benefit terms, even under these really quite conservative assumptions about life expectancy. So this is work which was obviously driven by our group of stakeholders. We were responding to that. We were working closely with the Met Office, and we think that we understand that this work will be useful to both perform policy, but also at the individual care home level of trying to understand what type of interventions will be affordable and are likely to be most effective. We've got some websites and at the website, and we've worked with the GLA, for example, on this, and also Subsidy Chartered Institute of Building Service Engineers, as I mentioned, and produced a report for their membership, which is many thousands worldwide. Okay, so that was just one project. As I mentioned, I went into a little bit of detail out. The rest I'll go through fairly quickly. This is another project which myself and colleagues within the Institute are involved in. It's a large project running for many years now, the NIH Health Protection Research Unit in Environmental Change and Health. This is a collaboration between the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the UK Health Security Agency, and the Met Office and UCL. And it's one of 14 of these centres across England. And our one, as the name suggests, is trying to understand the impacts and responses to environmental changes that affect our health. So there are many items listed there. There are many areas that the HPRU focuses on. Our institute is inputting to several of them. The first one lists the housing and climate change in particular, but also down the list of the health benefits of low carbon development, and hopefully making contributions across the piece.
Okay, Mike, you've got about a minute left.
Thank you. Project led by my colleague Dejan Monovic, again, under the UK Climate Resilience Programme, ARID. This is in relation to schools and building digital twins of these 22,000 schools in England. This is some work that Claire Heaviside has been involved in along with the Met Office, so relating to the health impacts of volcanic eruptions and the UK air pollution and RCPs. The final couple of slides, another one that Claire is involved in, a collaboration with the Met Office for the health effects of climate change in UK reports. This one is from a few years ago, and now that report is being updated and soon to be published. And this was the work that undertook quite significant work in relation to projected heat and cold deaths. The final slide is another project that Claire's involved with, this one funded by the Wellcome Trust. I don't think there's direct connections with or collaboration with the Met Office, although I think there's definitely opportunities for this. This is a project looking at the health and economic impacts of reducing overheating in cities. It's funded by the Wellcome Trust. And we also have another project, CUSH, Complex Urban Systems for Sustainability and Health, which is an international project, also funded by the Wellcome Trust, which there are certainly opportunities for collaboration with the Met Office and exciting ones at that. I'm aware I've gone through that very, very quickly. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for that. And I'm sorry to the speakers that you only have 10 minutes to summarize a whole load of work. And Mike, it's good to see some of the kind of detail as well from the Climaca project as well. So I'm going to move swiftly on to University of Bristol, where we have two presenters. So I think, Rachel, are you starting?
I am starting.
Oh, you're Francesca.
Yeah, I'm sharing the slides, and then Francesca's
Okay.
going to start.
Thank you, Francesca.
Can you see my slides okay?
Yes, it's absolutely fine. Yeah. So you might want to put it in presenter mode, I guess, or full screen. That's it. Perfect. Thank you. So Francesca, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to present the first part of our brief overview and then pass over to Rachel. We thought we could start by giving a bit of an overview of the research areas where Bristol is big and growing that are related to climate services, and then I'll pass over to Rachel to talk about our ongoing activities within MOAP. So if you can move to the next slide. I think a good starting point when we talk about climate services and how this relates to research in Bristol is through the Cabot Institute for the Environment. This is a cross university institute that brings together all the people who do research in the environmental area, and it's organized across 6 teams: water, low carbon energy, food security, natural hazard, city futures and environmental change. And so this is really our gateway, main entrance to research in the environmental domain. And as you can see, it really fosters collaborations across different disciplines, as you can see by the spread of the affiliation of our team leads. And I thought I would say a few more words in particular about the water team, because perhaps it's the one that most immediately relates to climate services. So water research is very strong at Bristol. We have over 15 academics, mainly spread across engineering and geographical sciences, and very high scientific reputation. And one of our key areas of research is modeling the water environment, particularly under uncertainty and global change, and really looking at the hydrological cycle across scales, from detailed local modeling to national scale to up to global modeling for drought management on the one end, and for floods on the other end, and as well as the interface between the land and the atmosphere. And so if we move to the next slides, I think we have a range of projects that again are relevant in this context, particularly looking at co-development of products and services to support decision making, again in the context of floods and global flood inundation models that are used by reduction risk agency as well as global insurers. And another area of expertise really is about handling uncertainty in this kind of models, and we have had a range of projects again with the global reinsurer to look at how we can improve the consideration of uncertainty in catastrophe modeling. And then on the other hand, when it comes to water resources, again, we have a range of collaborations in the UK
from individual water companies to the regulatory bodies and the Environment Agency, some of them focusing on water quality, and so understanding how land management impact water quality in rivers and surface water bodies. And then instead also on the quantitative side of things, looking at improving the way that water resources management decisions are made under uncertainty, again, both at individual water company level and at national level, so particularly contributing to this national system simulation model. And if we move to the next slide, so far the previous slide was perhaps focusing particularly on our ongoing work in the UK. We also have strong and perhaps growing partnerships instead, particularly targeting low and middle income countries. So here are some examples of projects that have been recently completed or are ongoing, again, on the one hand looking at water quantity, so particularly drought propagation in Africa, and on the other hand instead looking at water quality, water and sanitation, and how to increase the resiliency of urban and rural communities under climate change. And on the right hand side you see the logos of 3 institutes in particular that might be of interest in this context, that are again institutes that bring together people across the university that do research in Africa to kind of foster a co-production of research between within partnerships in African countries. And then recently we have this new institute focusing on poverty, again coming from different dimensions. And then we are involved in a range of partnership. Particularly maybe interesting here is the one with Himalayan universities. So I'll pass over to Rachel.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to continue by highlighting another area where research and climate services activities in Bristol are really flourishing, and that's climate and health. So the university has been having research activity around climate change and health for many years, but recently there's been a lot more activities and progress bringing these together. So I just wanted to provide a few examples here. On the left-hand side, you can see some results from a study examining the impact of limiting global temperatures to 1.5 on heat-related deaths in the US. So some quite high-profile and headline-grabbing studies coming out there, but we're also working directly with decision makers, and there's a long-running collaboration with Public Health England, now the UK Health Security Agency, which I know was mentioned by a couple of the other partners, which is really nice. And in Bristol, academics are working with them to improve, in particular, the monitoring of heat mortality and the method for doing that. Another really exciting development is that we now have a university strategy on climate change and health, which brings together different partners who are interested in this, including the Cabot Institute, which Francesca already mentioned, but also we have this interdisciplinary research institute on health called the Elizabeth Blackwell Institute, and this links nicely with the Met Office Academic Partnership. So next, I want to talk specifically about our MOAP. It's one of the relatively new ones, so this kicked off in 2020, and the theme of our MOAP is hazards to decision making. So you can already see from the broader theme that it's potentially really relevant to climate services. And if you look at our sub-themes there, one of them in particular, weather and climate services for decisions, is particularly focused on science relating to climate services. And actually me and Francesca, as well as Joe and Fai, are co-leading this theme. But the other 3 themes also potentially lead to inputs for climate services as well. And you can see that from the list of people I've named here. I haven't named all of the the theme leads, some of them you can see in the picture from our a meeting last year, but Chris Hewitt and Dan Mitchell, who are leading this, are big leaders in climate services. And then it's been really great having these new joint positions. So Lizzie Kendon, Joe Darren, Matt Palmer, Fai Fung, and Dan Burney are all now at the moment 20% working for Bristol. And that has led to some really exciting new projects and collaborations, including some that really relate strongly to climate services. So I just want to mention now a few of the kind of newer initiatives where we've got strong collaboration between Bristol and the Met Office. So one of them here is the Fractal Plus project. So this was led by Joe Darren, and it focuses on flooding in Lusaka in Zambia. And this is a NERC-funded project, and the idea is to co-develop climate information to support urban flood resilience, working with a kind of established team of stakeholders and researchers in Lusaka, and then also drawing in flood modelling expertise from Bristol. The second one is the Centre for Greening Finance and Investment, which is a consortium which includes quite a lot of the universities represented on this meeting today. So it's led from University of Oxford. And our role in Bristol is to examine the combined wind and flood risk to banks and insurers. And you can see here a figure by Hannah Bloomfield, who I think is on the call. So thanks, Hannah. But that could be a really interesting thing to discuss in our discussion time, because this climate service development for financial institutions, it relates to a lot of regulations and a lot of new demands to report climate risk. And so there's a lot of discussion there around standards for climate information, which could be interesting to a lot of other different climate services activities.
Rachel, sorry, Rachel, you've got under a minute now.
Okay, I'll hurry up. Thank you very much. Then Verity also already mentioned that Bristol's leading this temperature and health super app, which others here might be involved in, because there's 6 MOAP universities, as well as, of course, the Met Office and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And this collaboration has already submitted a NERC highlight topic proposal, which includes a lot of cutting edge science, but it would also include climate services, so tools for things like heat action plans and urban planning. And so today we're meeting to talk about research frontiers. So I put together this slide about where next, but I found it a bit difficult to limit myself, because potentially, you know, each and every one of us are dealing with a variable climate and a need to adapt to changing climate. And so we need a lot of expansion of climate services. And you'll see at the bottom the question, how do we scale up climate services, which is a big ask. But I think there's a lot of potential for exciting work across sectors, across the globe, across timescales, and also pulling in new people. So one of the questions I'm really interested in is, how do we communicate risk under uncertainty? Somewhat of an enduring question in climate services. And it's one example where we have real potential to learn from new disciplines. And at the moment, we are waiting for the results from a survey across Bristol academics and researchers to try and identify other people who might be interested in working on this with us. So sorry for going over time. There's lots of links here where you can find more information. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rachel and Francesca. It's good to see that the super app was mentioned. Thanks, Rachel. Just because Verity mentioned it right at the start, I think, so that's quite nice to see an example of that. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to move to Richard Betts. Richard, just to say, if you do have any questions, please do put them in a Google Doc. If we don't answer them now, we'll take them through to the Q&A panel session later. So over to you, Richard. You're still muted if you are. Great, thank you.
Yeah, okay, so hope you can see that. So thanks for the invitation to speak at this event. It's really been really good seeing the talk so far, actually. This is great. So this is some work led from the University of Exeter, but in partnership with the Met Office and many other organisations across the UK as well, including all the other MAP partners in some form or another. So it's the technical report for the third UK climate change risk assessment, which is part of an ongoing process to inform the National Adaptation Plan. The picture there is of adaptation in action, national level adaptation in action. It's the upgrading of the seawall at Dawlish down the road from here in Exeter. So this was a major piece of work, which is motivated ultimately by the Climate Change Act. So it's a legal requirement, a statutory requirement, that the UK government has to report to Parliament every 5 years with an assessment of the risks for the UK from climate change. And to do that, they get their advice from the Committee on Climate Change, which Mike is a member of, and they who provide the independent advice on this climate change risk assessment, and they in turn commission experts to provide the detailed information on this. And that's what the technical report was. It was the sort of technical information to underpin the Climate Change Committee's advice to government. And the exam question for this was based on our latest understanding of current risks and opportunities of climate change and vulnerability and adaptation, what should the priorities be for the next adaptation programme? So it's specifically to inform decision making and prioritisation. And this is the sort of flow of information and reports in the whole process. It took several years to do, but this is sort of focusing on the last few years. So on the left-hand side, this is kind of all the inputs to the technical report. So the literature on impacts adaptation, new work using the new UK CP18 climate projections, but other climate science as well. Some specially commissioned research, which the Climate Change Committee commissioned, and then a lot of engagement with stakeholders in government and private sector and other public organisations, especially those with responsibility for national level adaptation. So all that was synthesised in the technical report, the orange box there, which is what I'm speaking about now, which in turn informed the Climate Change Committee's advice report, the purple box at the top, which then led to the government report and on into the National Adaptation Programme, which is currently being developed at the moment. But there was also outputs at the level of the countries within the UK, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, each had their own summary reports, again done by the Climate Change Committee or their contractors, which again goes through to the devolved administrations, so informing policy at those levels as well. And the technical report itself, it was a huge piece of work, as I say, funded by the Climate Change Committee. It took us 3 years. There were 14 lead authors, but there were 42 contributing authors as well, and then other additional contributors, including members of the Climate Change Committee. And as I say, that included people from all MAP universities, I believe, and thousands of pages and references and so on, so a huge tome. And this was the lead authors, so you'll recognise many of the faces as colleagues. So just to point out, there's some of the MOAP universities within that team, but other people outside of this team were involved as contributing authors as well. So it was very collaborative and a huge range of expertise in there as well, which is very, very important, from climate science, climate modelling, all the way through to health, ecosystem impacts, many of the sort of social science aspects of international impacts of climate change and so on, infrastructure. So very, very multidisciplinary. And I haven't got time to go through the whole report, obviously, but just to give a flavour of kind of what we did and the conclusions for those who don't know, we looked at 5 categories of risks with several different risks within each category. So the categories were natural environment and assets, infrastructure, health, communities and built environment, business and industry, and international dimensions, and several risks within each of those. There were 61 risks in total. And we assessed each of those for what they mean for the UK. So, for example, one in the natural environment area was like risk to agriculture from pests, pathogens, and invasive species. We looked at infrastructure services from risk to them from river and surface water flooding in the infrastructure chapter. The health communities chapter looked at, one example was risk to health and well-being from high temperatures. The business industry, one example was risk to businesses from water scarcity. And in international dimensions, one example was risk to the UK from international violent conflict resulting from climate change impacts overseas. And for all of those, we looked at the current risk and the future risk on pathways to global warming of 2 degrees and 4 degrees by the end of the century, looking both mid-century and end of the century for both of those pathways. So quite a lot of assessment of different timescales of risk and different aspects of risks there, including the level of adaptation as well, really important. Are we adapted to these different risks? That was a key part of it. And also, what's the how urgent is it to respond to these? Are we adapted, and how urgently do we need to respond in terms of adaptation? So the top level conclusion was, out of the 61 risks, 34 of them were assessed as more action needed. So urgent work is needed to adapt to those straight away. So more than half the risks need more action. And in fact, only seven of them were assessed as not needing additional action at this time. So the others, which between these two categories, were basically further investigation is needed. So we're only adapted for 7 of the 61 risks. So that's very, very important information for the National Adaptation Plan, which, as I say, is being developed at the moment. So I just wanted to point out that collaboration was really, really important in developing the technical report. It was important that it was led from a university. That's why I led it from my University of Exeter role rather than my Met Office role, because it's independent of government. So the Met Office is, of course, part of government technically, so it's not really appropriate to lead it from a Met Office position. And actually, I did find it important to be separate from our customers, my Met Office customers of DEFRA and BAYS, who often will be quite closely involved in Met Office research, but I was able to be completely independent of them with my university hat on, which was very useful, I found. But having said that, partnering with the Met Office was really crucial because it enabled effective pull-through of climate projections. So especially using the UK projections. Fi himself was extremely involved in this, so thank you, Fi, for your input, but other colleagues as well. But also collaboration with the other partners from Marriott universities, other universities. The climate resilience programme was a key part of this. In fact, that funded some of my Met Office time to help with this, actually, and the non-academic organisations, consultancies and private sector organisations, Chatham House and others were involved. And that was also all crucial for getting the right expertise and the right level of research input. And finally, sort of perspectives on the research frontiers. So what do we need and where are we going to inform the next stage in the CCRA process? Because there will be, we assume, a 4th risk assessment unless the Act of Parliament changes the situation. But as it stands, there's legally required to be a 4th assessment in 5 years' time. So there's already ongoing impacts, risk and adaptation work with the latest climate projections, and particularly on interacting and compounding risks, but more is needed on that. We do need more work using projections that are not the high-end projections. There's a lot of focus on the RCP 8.5 scenario for historical reasons, but we need to focus much more on other scenarios as well, and think about the framing of the assessment for the next round, actually. We need more work on impacts, risk and adaptation for the current climate. There's a huge gap there. Closer involvement or even closer involvement as key stakeholders in the process and earlier in the process as well, because it was a bit of a rush to get a lot of information in the time that was required. And finally, we need more information and research and adaptation at local levels as well. So there's lots of there which can inform our research directions going forward. And that's it. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Richard. I didn't give you a warning because you said that you're on the final slide, so thanks for keeping to time. And it's great to see that. I didn't realise you were going to be talking about the climate change risk assessment. I know what a challenge it was to bring all that information together into a cohesive narrative. So yeah, so great to see that. So we've got a 5-minute comfort break. Is that right? Actually, we're 5 minutes. I think we're 5 minutes early for the comfort break, aren't we? But so I've got that a little bit wrong. But thank you everyone for keeping to time. I think what I should do is maybe we should just take the comfort break now. Maybe come back in 5 minutes. Have a little bit more time for the panel session, hopefully. So for the moment, if you could come back at 10 past. And if you do have some questions for the panel, then please do put them into the Google Doc, and obviously some follow-up questions from the presentations that we've just seen, then please do put in the Google Doc, and Joe and I will try and pose these to the panel. Great, so see you in about 5 minutes.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. If I could ask the speakers and the panelists to put your cameras on, if that's okay, so everyone can see you as we have a panel discussion. And just to say thanks again so much for the contributions in the with the talks there. I think I have enough questions myself to fill a panel discussion, but I promise I won't dominate with the questions. So yeah, please do add your questions to the Google Doc, or alternatively now using the chat function as well, and we'll monitor those questions as they come in. Also welcome to Professor Tim Wollings from University of Oxford and Professor Ros Cornforth from University of Reading. So yeah, we've now got the full set of the partners with us, so that's fantastic. And oh, Martha, fantastic. Yep, you're there as well. Great. Okay, so we're going to have a panel discussion. I'm going to open with a question which was prompted by this morning's session. So we had a session on big questions in climate services, and one of the areas that came up was the pace of climate services and the need to scale up existing activities. So we heard from a number of the speakers a number of projects that have been done, but with potential to scale up. And I think Martha highlighted in response to the question the potential need to consider this more. So I think I'll maybe start with Martha and then ask others to contribute as well, just so you have an answer. But what do you think is needed to scale up climate services, and what role could new research play in that space?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have the answer just yet. This is something I've started thinking more about in one of my recent projects. You know, the fact that a lot of these climate services tend to be developed as case studies, as pilot studies, right? That we then aim to think about how to extrapolate, how to implement these across different communities, different organizational contexts, and all of that. And we know why we tend to do the climate service as specific case studies, right? Because obviously, you know, the engagement with users, you know, the need for this co-production processes, they normally, you know, it is easier to consider these as very small case studies that we can then think about how to, you know, expand and extrapolate. But that's something we are looking at in the MedGold project, and I am currently analyzing the findings from some workshops we did where we try to understand what were the kind of the underpinning conditions required to think about how we can expand, implement, apply some of the decision tools that we develop within the project, within that particular group of stakeholders, into other organizations. So I don't have yet all of the answers. I know it does involve thinking about common denominators in terms of key characteristics in the services that can be applicable across different contexts. It requires training and building capacity. It will also probably involve having a lot of people actually that we engage with talked about having access to this network, peer-to-peer learning, social learning, you know, environments that allows them to swap ideas and learn from others, and how particularly kind of early adopters of those kind of innovations, of these new tools that I have developed, how can they think about implementing those within their own contexts and organizational settings. So I don't have a particular answer just yet. I have loads of questions, and I do know I hope to have a bit more of an answer in the coming months when we start really kind of putting together papers out of this research. But I think it is a key area, because otherwise what's the point of, you know, developing services that are only fit for purpose for a very small number of users?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Martha. Would anyone else like to come in on that point around scaling up? Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Bartra, and thanks. I think Rachel highlighted this question in your talks. You know, how do we scale up some of these things? I think it's a great question. Thanks. I've really enjoyed kind of sitting in on this and listening to all the talks. It's been really great. I mean, one thing that's really struck me is it's great how the kind of co-production of these services has really taken on, and it's great to see that in all kinds of projects. I agree. I think that is now. I mean, that's obviously been super useful, but it is now a challenge, I think, for scaling up. I mean, I wonder at times if there's a risk of kind of almost kind of over-tuning some of these services to kind of particular applications, particular regions, things like that. And it's, you know, that's not, you know, it's not really a criticism. It's just the way that we've been learning this through these pilot projects. But yeah, I think, you know, we need some kind of mechanism of kind of collecting this information and kind of learning the more generic lessons from these projects. And I don't have an answer, but I hope, you know, I'd hope that things like MOAP can help with this. I mean, one of the benefits of partnerships like MOAP and other partnerships is a kind of a longevity, right? So kind of, you know, building relationships that really kind of last over time. You know, individual projects come and go, and that's great, but having these really kind of longer term links, you know, can maybe help us learn some of those lessons, I think. I mean, I guess the, you know, hopefully institutions like the Met Office as well have kind of some kind of longer term memory than some of these individual projects, which might help. I guess you've been developing weather forecasts now for many decades, and you haven't co-produced each of your weather forecasts for every individual user. And so somehow that process worked, and so we need to try and kind of learn from that and copy it.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And that touched on this other theme of co-production as well as that we can come back to, I'm sure. Ross, I see you have your hand up, but just to give Mike some warning to the question in the chat there around whether you've found it harder to encourage engagement from some stakeholders. So Mike, I might come to you for that question first, but Ross, yeah, you had some thoughts on this issue of scale up.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, and apologies I couldn't join the first hour, but it's lovely to join the panel now. And I think it's just such a difficult question. It's so important. It's the perennial problem, and it's the scale gap is still persists, and that's the issue with what is produced and then what is needed, because context is everything to making sure that you have a fit for purpose climate service. So we have to have that contextual information in there, and that means we need absolutely that co-production and to have ensuring that local experts are at the centre of driving those climate services. That's critical. So how do you go about maintaining the right power dynamics, having the right people at the centre leading and shaping those climate services, homegrown climate services, and yet enable more people to access the climate services, and so as with the others, there isn't an easy answer right now, but there are signposts towards directions of travel. For example, a critical part of this is ensuring that contextual information feeds through to support climate science. So one aspect of this is decentralizing data collection to make sure that local users are actually part of the process of collecting that so important information, the data that's needed to really drive the climate services from the context perspective. So that's one aspect. How do we build that capacity locally and enable that kind of process? And that could be on the ground in situ data collection as much as it could be also in really how do we use AI? How do we really use remote sensing to collect context-specific information? So there's that is one aspect, but the second aspect is really where did the private sector fit in? Because they are the ones who can really drive impact scale, right? That's critical. So it's not only homegrown climate services and decentralizing that data collection, but also how can we really build and enrich and develop fruitful partnerships with the large corporates that can really help build that impact at scale, which has, we've been doing our pilots and our research projects, but we haven't really got on board with that piece yet. And I think that's a missing element that might be more usefully developed, and understanding what the business model is in that space. I've talked a lot, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. You raised some a range of different real challenges, but hopefully opportunities as well for work that can support this idea of scale up. I'll pass over to Mike in a second, but just because you raised a few points there, does anyone else want to come in and respond to to that around perhaps the sort of localization of data or private sector involvement in climate services and research that can support that. Richard.
Yeah, so what Tim said and what Ros said, both thinking those together is really interesting about the role of the private sector and thinking about what the role the private sector has played in weather services. It would be good to reflect on that as we sort of develop climate services. Because Tim said we develop weather forecasts, obviously, but the services side has been done largely outside of the Met Office, and the Met Office has kind of came in kind of later after kind of private sector organisations started doing the service thing largely. So it's an interesting perspective, actually. I think that's definitely worth reflecting on that as an example. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Richard. Rachel.
Thanks. Yeah, I mentioned the Centre for Greening Finance and Investment, and I think one of the things that we're working on in that project is trying to understand not only the requirements for climate risk analytics from financial institutions, but also this kind of emerging number of businesses and different consultancies and actors that are starting to provide those climate risk analytics. And I think as the Met Office and researchers and academics, we can play a role in trying to work with those organizations to learn from our research about what works and what doesn't, and make recommendations, which means that we're not necessarily doing all of the climate services, but we are connected with the private sector actors that are.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And Mike, I keep on saying we'll come back to you. But maybe, I mean, you might want to reflect on this question as well in the discussion. But I will pose the other question that's been put in the chat, which is, have you found it harder to encourage engagement with some stakeholders than others? I'm just thinking particularly of your care home example. So yeah, I wonder if you could reflect on that.
Oh, well, I'll start with that the care home example, and I think maybe we were quite surprised by how enthusiastic the stakeholders were in wanting to be involved. And I mentioned the Care Quality Commission, who were really vital as part of this to help us co-create the project, but also help us to work through the project and engage with care settings. And then also to kind of think, well, how will our results be used in terms of inspections in care homes, and try to understand how can inspectors assess whether homes are well protected, appropriately protected against heat, for example. But also government departments, so the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities are involved in our advisory board. The Department of Health and Social Care are involved, and so on. So it wasn't necessarily straightforward, but I think there was a lot of enthusiasm, and it's just been really, not surprisingly, in line with what others have said, of course, essential to enable us to think how to design the project and how to work through the project. Dealing with these issues in the pandemic was incredibly challenging, but we managed to find ways through that with the help of the stakeholders, but also stakeholders such as engineering firms who are involved in the design of and construction of new care homes. They've also been very enthusiastic. It's important for their business to understand how such settings can be protected. So yeah, I think probably maybe a little bit surprising, but we found really enthusiastic engagement and a willingness to work with us. And I think, I don't know, that particular example, it just seems such a pressing issue, and there's clearly an issue. Every care home that we're going in is overheating, and I think there was this, of course, an acknowledgement of the dangers of cold, exposure to cold, but I think now the acknowledgement of the risks of heat are becoming better understood within that setting. So that's just that one project, but I think generally, when in our work with cities, for example, I think where cities are developing plans to address adaptation and mitigation targets, I think there's just a huge demand for that engagement and knowledge exchange. You know, we're learning all the time from cities, you know, how to design projects and work with cities, and hopefully we're providing some useful input as well to engage with them and designing their plans. So yeah, I think I don't know if others on the call would agree, but I think it's been generally quite a positive and you know, encouraging and refreshing experience, right? Maybe I'm too optimistic, but.
Thanks, Mike. And then Richard, you've got your hand.
Yeah, so I would agree with Mike that generally speaking, there's enthusiasm to engage with this kind of work from stakeholders, but in practice, sometimes it can be very challenging in terms of you know, getting quality and well, especially time from the right people at the right time in the kind of research and application process, and also getting proper information, especially data, if data is sensitive, that they hold. It might be a commercial organisation or a government organisation. So sometimes the level of enthusiasm can vary, but for practical, well, not exactly enthusiasm, the level of engagement can vary for practical reasons such as that. So it is important to try and overcome those. It'll depend who you're working with. It can be challenging. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I can see a couple of questions coming in on the chat. Tim, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly on this, I think one issue that I have heard about a bit, mostly, so I guess I'm in a physics department here, and I think it's probably from other areas of physics rather than us, but I am hearing increasingly about stakeholder fatigue, and that people are I guess especially with academic funding models where you know, people have to write proposals to get funding, and a lot of kind of key stakeholders are just bombarded by requests for letters of support and supporting various projects and things. And I get the feeling that some people are spending, you know, so long on this aspects of it that then actually they're exhausted and don't have any time left to engage in the few projects that do get funded. So I think there's a bit of an issue there. Yeah, I don't really know what to do about it.
Thanks, Tim. I'll come to, I think Martha had a hand up first, and then Ross. But to give people thinking time for another question. So we've had a question which is, in order to carry out research and collaboration, are there significant gaps in the data and information needed or challenging to accessing this to support projects? So if people want to have a think about that in the meantime, but Martha, I'll come to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I just want to raise something which is a bit tangential to what has been said. I think Richard mentioned in his presentation about the, you know, and which links with the CCRA and the work we're doing with the UK in terms of the National Adaptation Plan and all that, which is, and this maybe it's because of my background in planning policy or something, in working local authorities, but there, you know, the local authorities are screaming for help, support in trying to translate and requiring expertise and input into how make sense of the data to inform their adaptation plans, which are now starting to emerge following up from climate change emergency declared by many of them in 2019. And they're now moving from their net zero plans, which were the kind of the first step that a lot of them took. And they're now starting, some of them are starting to think about how to link that with the adaptation side of it. And I see this as a massive gap here. I mean, not only in terms of research, but in terms of practical support and resources that local authorities need across the board. There's only so much we can do as academics, but I think, and I know this because we have been contacted by the lead city council to ask for our help in terms of how do we make sense of this. And I know from the point of view of the Met Office that you already do these really fancy CT packs information where they get a lot of tailored information to their cities and regions and all that. But there's still a massive gap there between how to make sense of this data and use it in inform policy and action on the ground. So I think I just wanted to raise, this is almost like a call for attention from us as researchers, academics, that I think there's something there we could be doing as a group, maybe, in terms of supporting some of these local authorities. And if anyone is interested in maybe looking into this, reach out to me, because we're, as I said, we're in conversation with lead city councils, and some of us have backgrounds in adaptation and vulnerability, and we're working trying to make sense of how we can work and support them, and maybe use them as a case study to then expand to other local authorities in the UK. So if you're interested, and obviously this links with climate services in some shape or form. So if you're interested, let me know and we'll have a chat. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Marcia. And that reminds me to highlight the part of the motivation for this session was to, first of all, showcase what work is going on, but also for those who aren't involved in this kind of research, but maybe at the Met Office or at the Moat partner universities or other academic institutions to reach out. So at the end of this session, we'll provide some contact details for getting in touch, and we'll make sure we continue conversations on this. Ros, you had your hand up, but it's now down, so I don't know if you're...
No, sorry, I was just saving the yellow hands on the screen, but I was I just wanted to make just two small but important points. It's difficult in the kind of project funding cycles that we all have and are aware of in terms of academics to be able to engage in the right way with people that avoids the stakeholder fatigue. But nothing sings louder than when you're actually coming to people and you're listening first and learning from people what they want. That demand-led side of research is so important. We're so good at turning the handle on our research bench and just dropping out something and going, okay, here you go, do you want to do something with it? That's so much not the place we should be in. It's about demand-led research. What do people want and need? Let's listen to that. Then let's produce let's turn the handle and harness the science to support the decisions that are on people's desks, as Marta's just been speaking to. So that hook and in avoiding stakeholder fatigue comes back to really understanding where people are and what they need and what they want, even if that's not what you want to do first as researchers, because there's, my gosh, you could find some other interesting research along the way if you start where people are and use that as the first hook. So that's one thing. And to do that, another thing that's so important is building the trust equity, building those partnerships long term, not short term, just coming in and coming out again. Developing trust, spending time, nurturing those relationships. That's everything. If we're going to help, whether it's about building the right climate service or actually doing the research in the right way, building the trust equity, finding the ways to fund some work that's in, using a plethora of channels to make sure that you can carry on working with those people and those partners on the issues that is so critical to them. So that's just a couple of points, and I think just changing the shift, learning as we're in the process of listening to people, just shifting the dynamics a little. So we're not the dominating partners. We're not dominating and dropping down our research. We're actually supporting, helping to devolve capability. Because my gosh, in risk, we have to understand vulnerability. We have to understand exposure. We don't have that information, but the people who are asking the questions, they may well do and can help work with us. So let's focus much more on those demand-led and partnerships which are founded on trust, and that somehow we can find funding to support that in different ways.
You mentioned funding at the end there. I was just going to comment that I think the funding landscape in climate services is changing and is open to kind of new ideas, and particularly around demand-driven research from that recognition. But maybe there's still a way to go for the community. Mike, I'll come to you shortly, but Francesco, I just wanted to give you a heads up because I know you have to leave shortly. But just to have a look at the question from KS there that I mentioned a second ago, so I'm going to come to you for your thoughts on that, because I know that's something that you might be able to reflect on. But Mike, yeah, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I was actually going to make a very similar point to the ones that Ros made, I think, and just really trying to have a step back from these conventional research cycles and really trying to ensure that we do build time in them to enable this transdisciplinary working. If we really are, that's what we're trying to achieve, working with stakeholders in that transdisciplinary way, as well across academic disciplines, then we need time before the projects start to really plan and think and develop program theories in a very integrated way across everybody who's involved. So people understand what other people are saying, we start to speak the same language, and it's enormously challenging to do this transdisciplinary work. And I think that needs to be acknowledged in a much stronger way than it is currently. And I don't have necessarily a solution for it. It feels like there's a big gap there to allow this time before the project starts and we race away with the project to really be clear via a co-developed program theory what it is we're trying to do, what actions are we going to take, and what changes do we expect to see as a result of those changes, and be very clear about that and co-develop it. And the second quick point was just maybe an obvious one, but the challenges of maintaining relationships, for example, with Marta's point about local authorities, there can be quite rapid turnover, and everyone invests a lot of time building these relationships, and it can work very well for a period of time. Then even when individuals leave, it has potentially enormous consequences for how that work in the project then might be used for impact. So it was just a couple of quick points to build on what Marta and Rosa said. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And I could see a lot of nodding as you were speaking there, and I think I was nodding too as well. I was conscious of my nodding. But yeah, okay, Francesca, would you like to address that question? So, in order to carry out research and collaboration, are there any significant gaps in the data and information needed, or challenges to accessing this to support projects?
I don't know why you picked me. Such a difficult question.
Yeah, as well. I think given your work in the kind of as almost a user of climate information, so particularly in hydrology and engineering, it's obviously part of that basis in your climate service value chain or kind of that collaboration. But yeah,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's a very big question, but perhaps two thoughts that I would like to contribute to the discussion. One is, again, connecting to the issue that we were discussing before about the specifics. Then when we go to a local scale and or a specific target user group, then one thing I think I've kind of learned over time is that what data and information gaps are significant is, again, very much context dependent, and depending on the type of decision that needs to be informed by projections or any model output, then the gaps that really matter or the errors that really matter in our projection change. So yeah, I don't have an answer to this question in general, and I think there is no general answer, and perhaps there is actually an extra challenge in the fact that, again, also, the sensitivity of decision to different gaps in our knowledge is different from context to context. And so perhaps, and I wanted to link back again to what was being discussed before, I'm not sure we can ever come up with a definite and ultimate mapping of what is needed where, but perhaps what we could do is kind of develop a bit more of harmonized approaches and coherent approaches to address some of the questions, so that we improve the variability of results across case studies, and we have at least a common ground to begin to make some draw some slightly more general conclusions, which again also links to the data problem, I suppose, and information gaps. And I think one of my worries in all this type of research is, yes, how do we kind of fight fragmentation and bring together results and make them at least comparable. And the same goes when talking about uncertainty, I think, and gaps. Yeah.
Fantastic. Richard.
Thanks. So following on from that, as a general point, I think the challenge is often getting hold of existing data and information rather than the data itself not being there. Often there's really useful data, especially for adaptation to climate change, held by individual organisations, either in the private sector or government, which getting it all together at a scale large enough to be useful can be quite challenging. So I'm thinking about, the water sector. Individual water companies have information. In the energy sector, individual energy companies have information, which well, years ago when the Met Office started to work in the energy sector, the Met Office brought together the first national data set of how faults from extreme weather on the electricity distribution system, that was all brought together by the Met Office because the industry had not done it. It was all held by individual companies. So there's kind of the practical side of getting the data together from the owners, but and also coming back to the what Tim was saying about stakeholder fatigue. If it's all kind of done on one-to-one relationships, there's the bandwidth issue there, isn't there? There needs to be some kind of process of making the data just more freely available, frankly, in a kind of more community approach, really, which doesn't always work with many of the organisations that we need to get the information from. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. So Tim, I'll come for a quick contribution, and I want to move to one sort of final question, which I'll give everyone a chance to provide a quick answer to. There are a couple of comments and questions in the Google Doc that I haven't had a chance to look at, and maybe one could be for Marta to answer. Yeah, Tim, over to you first.
Yeah, so on the data gap question, one thing I wonder a bit is, so particularly it's in the research agenda, but also outside, there's increasing talk about storylines as being a kind of an alternative way to communicate climate information. I feel like a lot of the services are currently focused on a kind of a traditional probabilistic approach. There's obviously a lot of discussion and research going on about storylines, but it seems like they're potentially useful, and that's something that could be explored more in this context, I think. I don't know if Ted Shepherd is here. He, in my experience, he tends to appear on any Zoom meeting if you leave it running long enough, but we'll see.
I don't think he is, but maybe we should leave it running longer. Ross, to you. Oh, you want mute, Ross?
Sorry, very quickly, because I work very closely with Ted. Not that I'm going to try in any way to be a proxy there, but just to say that I think and watch the space in Nature Communications. That's a shameless plug, but there's something I hope that will be very interesting coming soon, which is actually looking at this space and talking about the how fit for purpose climate risk assessments are currently, given the crisis that's heading towards us, and certainly in the work that we've been doing in terms of supporting adaptation planning, climate storylines have been a very effective way to work, engage, and ensure that there is contextual information at the centre, which goes back also to the point around data availability and the data gap. John, you just added a point about hi, Crystal. Yeah, but the data gap is critical, and it's not just about whether it is or isn't. It is there, but held by specific individuals or organisations. But let's project it to developing countries where I spend most of my time working, and I'm just mindful. Example, Upgrow program and work we did with BGS and David McDonald and co, where the only way we could look forwards in time to the changing the impacts on groundwater and therefore support sectoral planning in the water space was because there was, surprisingly, in Burkina Faso, information that went back nigh on 40 odd years, groundwater data that we could look back at and therefore evaluate the couple model systems we were using and look forwards in time to be able to actually really move the dial in terms of planning. And that there was no as people may correct me, but I don't think there's another country in Africa that has that same extent of groundwater data that can be accessed to actually even start the planning process. So there's all sorts of questions around the data and organisations that hold it, but there's also investment, large-scale investment that needs to be put in place so we can monitor and manage the changing climate, and also looking at the impacts on people's livelihoods particularly as well. So just a quick input.
Thanks so much, Ross. So I'm going to go to Fi in a few minutes to summarise, just to give him a heads up as well, the discussion we've had. But I want to end on just coming back to this kind of question of research frontiers, and maybe combining a couple of questions. But the first really is, what areas of research should be a priority to help advance climate services over the next decade and why? And maybe in that answer also reflecting on which other disciplines, new or emerging disciplines, haven't been engaged in climate services research, perhaps as much as they should be and should be engaged over the coming years. So quite a big question, lots of things could answer that, but maybe I'll just go for very quick sort of 20 to 30-second responses if that's possible, and I'll go around everyone, and I might pick on Rachel to go first if that's okay. But Rachel, yeah, if that's okay, over to you.
Yeah, sure. I think a huge question. That, you know, this is a problem that cuts across all kinds of decision makers, all kinds of sectors. So, and I was struggling a bit to think about the data and information question, because there's so many different kinds of data and information that would feed into climate services. But one thing that I'm particularly interested in is testing climate information, because I think that we spend a lot of time talking about how challenging it is to develop climate services. And there are efforts to evaluate them, but we don't necessarily do this in a very scientific way always. And I really like the work that you've done, Joe, testing different visualizations. And so I'm interested in testing different climate services, or even different information outputs, or even co-developed outputs, to evaluate what works and what doesn't, and how people respond to the kind of climate information that we're developing. And I think that draws on different kinds of disciplines, in particular risk communication. And I'm looking forward to working on that with others here, and looking forward to hearing what other people see as the research frontiers.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And since you mentioned my work, I obviously agree with that. but yeah, no, thanks for highlighting that. Yeah, risk communication is a key area. And I'm just going to go across my screen in the order I have. So Richard, to you next.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say a similar thing, actually. So understanding how people perceive the information and then use it is really, really crucial. Often it needs to be much simpler than we want to provide it, but not always. But really understanding what people are going to do with it. And this is what I was saying earlier about engaging with on the stakeholder engagement side, really having kind of time and quality there, because often people don't really know what they want to do with what we can provide until you start doing it. So it's really learning from putting it into practice about how things will be used, but and the perception of what we're advising people is the really important thing, I think.
Great, thanks, Richard. And next is Tim.
Yeah, thanks. I think we've talked about lots of the key issues. I think. I mean, I guess one thing that was just mentioned recently is the kind of validation aspect, which I think is really important. And kind of I guess coming slightly from the more blue skies perspective, I think there's a huge challenge in general to do with kind of understanding the non-stationarity in the climate system. Part of that is forced change, obviously, which is a real focus, but also just understanding the natural variability, which I think often isn't well enough represented in our models. And so, I mean, it was mentioned just now, there is, locally, there's often a real reliance on kind of historical records, observations, which are obviously hugely important. But I think the big challenge is to work out how much, to what extent those observations, from 40 years ago, say, are still relevant to today's climate. I think that's a massive challenge.
Great, thanks, Tim. Yeah, and I think the comments about the understanding today's climate as well. So we think of climate services as forecasts and projections, but very much understanding risk in today's climate as well, and how we do that. So Mike, over to you next.
Thanks. What came to mind when you raised the question was really a bit of an increased emphasis on systems thinking and bringing that systems approach to bear as much as possible, I think, and acknowledging that really, these single focused policies will almost inevitably result in unintended consequences. And if we are really to move towards this net zero and resilient UK, then we need to make sure, I think, that we're thinking very carefully about these systemic interactions between different policies to try to ensure that the individual policies have the greatest chance of success, but understanding what negative unintended consequences there might be, acknowledging what trade-offs there might be, but really importantly, to really try to maximise the core benefits that arise from these. And the area that I work in particular in housing, really it's essential to integrate the mitigation and adaptation work. And there are multiple aspects of in those areas. So yeah, I would. It's maybe a general point, but to try to think of ways that we can bring systems thinking approach to bear into the work.
Great, thanks, Mike. And then now to Ros.
Thanks. Gosh, there's lots of different things. I mean, I think something that's looming up very fast is how we combine new technologies with our climate simulations and data. So how are we going to best use cloud and AI technology to really tackle some of the big data gaps that exist and are there, and that aligns with the call about building capacity to take a systems-based approach to really help train people in interdisciplinary methodologies, and really as part of that, a critical part of climate services is the synthesis of information. So we should be taking every opportunity as academics to not only open our own minds and think about what other disciplines are needed to help inform and solve a problem, but also how do we make sure that our undergraduates and our postgraduates are armed with the skill sets that they need to work in this interdisciplinary world with hugely complex challenges. So yeah, I'll leave it there. There's lots there, but technology and data and evidence synthesis and building the skills of our next generation of scientists to do that.
Great, perfect. Thanks, Ros. And Martha, finally to you.
I'm glad I was the last because I had time to think about what are the key topics because I have too many. But I think it was mentioned before, this idea of climate services do not exist in a vacuum. They are situated in a wider landscape of other disciplines that have been operating for many years: adaptation, risk management, disaster risk reduction, all sorts of things. So we need to better integrate that. And for example, the example I gave in terms of local authorities here in the UK, it's an example of how we can think across the systems approach that was just mentioned. We need to be a bit more holistic on how we do this. Assessing value and benefits of climate services, we need to understand a bit better how to approach it methodologically, but how to do it and how to capture less economically tangible benefits. There's loads of social and environmental benefits that we need to be able to capture, particularly in the Global South, where these things are not so black and white. Ethical aspects is another emergent area in terms of climate services, not only in terms of how we produce the science and how we set up the agenda for these kind of topics, but also who we bring into the table and who we involve in the research projects. We tend to involve the usual suspects, and then also that leads to stakeholder fatigue, but also raises other issues about who are not being included in this kind of research projects. So it is important for us to be aware of that. And think about it. The upscaling of solutions, we already talked about that, but also the legacy, and that I think it was a question also in the Google Doc. The legacy. These projects are 3-4 year long, and then by the time we have actually a tool that works, that people are happy with, the project ends, and then they go and die. The results go and die in a shelf somewhere. So how do we actually extend the legacy? And I think part of it is linking with existing networks, with the existing platforms that already produce and provide a lot of this information. So Copernicus Climate Change Service is an example, for example, but there's others. And it's not only about platforms in terms of data provision, but also in terms of networks of knowledge, people sharing information. So I think there's actually that area needs to be thought as well in terms of research. And the final point is this idea, and this is something I've been working on with colleagues as well, and there's a paper coming out on it, is the different functions of climate services. We tend to think of it as providing climate information knowledge to fit a particular decision-making process or inform some kind of activity or policy. But I think it is important for us to start thinking about climate services as something much more, and linking back to this idea of linking with adaptation and climate risk management. Climate services can be tools for all different things, not only to inform policy and decision-making, but also to raise awareness, to inform activist groups, to put pressure in their MPs, for example, or for learning activities in schools. So I think it takes all sorts of shapes and forms, and we would be selling ourselves short if you think climate service is something that is just to feed into a policy or for a particular decision-making process. That's it, more or less.
Great. Thanks so much, Marta, and thanks to all of the speakers from this session. And if those online can do a virtual round of applause using the various Teams functionality. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been a really rich discussion. I'm going to pass over to Fi now to summarize, and then I'll close the session.
Yeah, so I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone again for the presenters and really fascinating part of the discussion. I've got so many notes here, but I guess rather than repeat what people said, I think there's something that I'd like to draw out, which is, I think it was Tim who mentioned something around the even in this room, in this virtual room, of the kind of collaborations that have happened here and the longevity of some of the MOAP partnerships. So we talk about kind of longevity in terms of some of the projects that we do, but actually some of the kind of collaborations, academic to academic collaborations, actually that those have gone on for quite a while, and actually some of the kind of great projects that come out of it is because of that. But obviously, we need to think about, I think it was brought out particularly around the kind of stakeholders, and I really was struck by something that I've been thinking a lot about, is that kind of demand-led and listening first, and the idea of and actually really, I think there is a challenge of that kind of supply-driven versus demand-led, and we're always going to struggle a little bit of that depending on the kind of institutional type of research that you do, but I think it's something that is really interesting. I think, right, there's so many to talk about, but I think the one last point I wanted to make was that I think the upscaling question was quite a challenging one for all of us, and I think there's just, I think what I would like to say is that I think from the presentations that I've seen today, and also some of the discussion, where I think we are all thinking about how we draw those generic lessons. Maybe that's the way to do it, and actually maybe the next step is really to try and think about how we do that more kind of formally, or like sharing that experience and trying to get those generic lessons out there, if that's even possible. But I guess I think we're striving for that, so that's a great thing. So I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. It's 4 o'clock now. I think we are going to be sharing some of the details. If you want to get more information about the MOAP, as well as contacting myself and Joe to kind of find out more. And you've seen the speakers, so, and everyone's been asking to kind of like communicate with each other. So please do get in contact. Let's collaborate. I think there's some really interesting questions that we all seem to share. So I look forward to what we do in the next few years to come. Thank you very much.